Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested, and for today I'm reviewing Samsung's new Galaxy S7 smartphone. It's their new flagship, and actually there are two flagships. There's the Galaxy S7 and also the S7 Edge. Now, if you remember last year, I really loved Samsung's Galaxy S6. I love the design, I love the speed, the display, you can use VR with it, and they've kept a lot of the same things in the Galaxy S7. It has a beautiful 2560 by 1440p AMOLED screen, the latest generation from Samsung, with wide viewing angles and a full color gamut. It has Qualcomm fast charging. You can actually charge it from 0 to 100% in just a little over an hour. There's wireless charging built in, a fingerprint sensor, and Gorilla Glass on the front and the back. The design is only slightly changed from this year to last year on the Galaxy S7. If you notice on the back, it's a little more beveled, and that actually makes it easier to hold in the hand. You're less prone to dropping it, which is good because it is glass on the back. I do wish that they actually went with aluminum back. That would make me more confident in my ability to drop it, but just don't drop the phone. But what's really improved overall is the internals. Now there's a Qualcomm 820 Snapdragon processor on the inside of the Galaxy S7 in the US version. Overseas, it's actually Samsung's own processor. Now I haven't used the new Exynos processor from Samsung, and the reports are that it's actually a little bit better in multitasking in the international version than the Qualcomm model, but Samsung also bumped up the RAM in the Galaxy S7 this year to 4 gigabytes, which actually does make it feel a lot snappier when I'm switching between applications. And I would be remiss to note that there's actually a difference between the Galaxy S7 and the Edge models. There's no more Edge and Edge Plus. There's just the Edge, which is a bigger phone. My personal preference is still the Galaxy S7 normal version. I think I'm not 100% sold on the curved glass of the Edge model, even though you can swipe from the side and access a few shortcuts from the side of the screen. Now, performance, I think, is a known quantity. These phones are plenty fast for the vast majority of things you're going to be doing on the smartphones today. What it boils down to me are 4 pretty big upgrades in the Galaxy S7 this year from last year. Things that I thought were missing last year that they've made improvements on. First, storage. Samsung has brought back expandable storage on the Galaxy S7. You can put a micro SD card up to 200 gigabytes in this phone. Now, the caveat is that Samsung actually, while the phone uses Android Marshmallow 6.0, it doesn't have the feature that allows the phone to combine the internal storage, 32 gigabytes only in the US version, with the expandable storage to make Android think it's just one storage device. You have to still split up your applications and your media, while other Marshmallow phones can actually combine expandable storage with internal storage. That wouldn't be so disappointing if in the US, Samsung was selling models above 32 gigabytes. But like I mentioned, in the US, you can only buy the GS7 in the 32 gigabyte model, even though there is a 64 gigabyte model elsewhere. The second thing that's a huge improvement is actually the battery life. Now, Samsung didn't go all the way back and allow you to remove the battery as with previous generation phones and other manufacturers' smartphones like the LG G5, but the battery capacity is increased up to about 3,000 milliamp hours, up from 2,600 milliamp hours in the GS6, and the GS7 Edge has even more capacity than that. I got about a full day's worth of usage from last year's GS6, and with the GS7, it's just even more comfortable. It's actually more than the full day of use. On the GS7 Edge, I think it actually reaches the battery life of the iPhone 6s Plus, which I think is a high bar for battery life on these phones. And of course, there's fast charging with Qualcomm Fast Charge Quick Charge 2.0 on these phones, and support for wireless charging on both the major wireless charging standards. I think that's a big improvement this year from last year. One feature that Samsung did bring back from previous generations phones is water resistance. Now, you remember the GS5, the Galaxy S5, Samsung touted it as being water resistant, but it had a really ugly, gnarly flap that you use to cover that micro USB port on the bottom. The GS7 now is completely water resistant, rated at IP68, which means it can survive being immersed in water, but it doesn't use any type of coating and there's no flap. What it actually uses are rubber gaskets along all the ports that allow it to survive even when it's turned on when it drops in water. Now when you take it out of the water and it's still wet, if you plug it in, it won't charge your phone, but it also won't brick your phone. The phone is smart enough to know that it's still wet and it won't allow the phone to charge. And finally, the biggest improvement, I think, in this year's GS7 is the camera, probably the most important feature in modern smartphones. The high bar for Android cameras last year, I thought, was the LG G4. And since then, I've really taken a liking to Apple's iPhone 6s Plus camera with its optimal image stabilization. The GS7 tops that. I think it's hands down the best smartphone camera you can find in a smartphone today. It's a 12 megapixel sensor, which is less than last year's 16 megapixel sensor, but it's not an apples to oranges comparison because they're different aspect ratios. On the GS6, that 16 megapixels was stretched across a 16:9 aspect ratio, which made photos look great when you're looking at them at a 16:9 screen. The 12 megapixels on the GS7 are actually in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which I think is actually more useful when you're sharing images on services like Facebook or Instagram, when you want to share images that are more square-like than long rectangular-like. The difference also is in the sensor itself. That camera sensor has phase detect autofocus points on every single pixel, and that makes it much faster to flip the camera on, find focus, and take a picture. Comparing it directly with the iPhone is actually much faster to take rapid pictures and in-focus pictures with the GS7, and also with a wider aperture lens. It's aperture 1.7 compared to 1.9 in last year's model. The low light performance is absolutely amazing. It's much less noise. You can pick out more details in photos with the GS7 than on the GS6 or even the iPhone 6s Plus. The photos are a little bit warm, and that's a known problem, I think, in JPEGs or in the image processing on the Samsung's phones. But this year, Samsung did also put in raw photo saving. So I can take the DNGs out of the phone and put them in the Lightroom and change my white balance after the fact, and even reduce more noise. And Samsung actually put in optical image stabilization for photos and videos in the phone while, looking at this, reducing the back hump of the camera. It's improvements across the board on the camera in the Samsung GS7. A couple more anecdotes from my time with the GS7. One interesting thing is Samsung kept a micro USB port on the bottom of the phone. It's still USB 2.0. It's not USB Type-C, and I think the reason they did this is to maintain compatibility with the Gear VR headsets that they released late last year. Hopefully next year they'll port all of that to USB Type-C, which is the way moving forward. Because it also uses an AMOLED screen, there's an ambient on-screen notification. When you have the screen off, it displays the time and icons for new notifications, but it's not very customizable, and it's not as good as previous ambient information screens like on Motorola's phones. I wish Samsung did a better job there. And while Samsung still uses its TouchWiz UI on top of Android Marshmallow, it's like last year, not very intrusive. The only thing about TouchWiz I don't like is that you can't use passive Google Now voice activation on this phone. You still have to use Samsung's S Voice, which I'm not a big fan of. But all in all, I think the GS7 and the GS7 Edge are huge improvements over last year's already great phone. And if you're a Samsung fan, if you have something like the GS5, now I think is the right time to upgrade to the GS7. It's available on all major networks and carriers in the US and internationally. If you're going to try to get it unlocked, consider the international version, because you can get higher storage capacities on the international version, and with Samsung's processors in that version, you might get better multitasking as well. We'll have more reviews on tested.com, more smartphones, more Android devices, tablets, and the like. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye.